Good morning, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. You already know what I'm about to say with this. Thank you so much. It means the world to me, it means the world to my family as well, because my mom in particular challenged me to get to this goal before her birthday, which is today actually, and we made it yesterday. Would have loved to have made a video yesterday, but I ended up being very busy with some stuff outside of YouTube, of course, and my day job. So but even then, just to see this meant the world yesterday. It really brought my spirits up because it was a tough day. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into the weather here. Before I get into it further, I also want to say make sure you're smashing that like button, decimating that subscribe button, and hitting that share button as well. So we'll get into the weekend forecast here because I'm actually not going to have a video up tonight. I'm going to actually be taking my mom to a restaurant, so I'm going to be tied up. That being said, we're getting into today's threat here. And actually, I want to go back here because this storm system is going to play a part in the new storms that will end up forming here. This MCS, which was also responsible for significant severe weather yesterday across the northern plains here, even producing 5 tornadoes, all of which were in South Dakota. This is actually going to end up having what's called an MCV, or mesoscale convective vortex, that's going to pop up over here over towards Iowa and Illinois, and this is going to be the catalyst for new severe storms to develop. What's interesting for an MCV, though, is that A, it's not picked up very easily on models. B, it moves in a clockwise motion, where in this side of the hemisphere we tend to move in a counterclockwise motion. And then on top of that, we also don't have to have that same kind of wind shear you would have to have with a traditional severe setup. So how do I know that this is happening if it's not being picked up on models? Well, it was mentioned in the synopsis, so let's go ahead and get into that. So this is our current outlook right now. Here's a severe weather threat that stretches all the way from central Minnesota all the way down through Iowa and Illinois, as per mentioned, and then even stretching all the way towards western Kentucky, throughout a large chunk of Missouri, and then even a small portion of eastern Kansas and southeastern Nebraska. I think later in the day is when we'll start to see this portion of the severe threat take shape here. We'll go by this line here because I kind of messed that one up. Good thing this Spanish is quick. But that being said here, the main threat is going to, of course, be wind. Usually with the MCV setups, we end up seeing a very high wind threat, but these can and do produce tornadoes, and we do have a 2% tornado threat that exists across this little portion over here. And it's going to be partially in a large part due to that MCV. So when we look at the synopsis, here we go. Shortwave trough will develop across the northern plain, or will intensify across the southern plains. Ridging aloft will modestly increase. A low will move through the upper Midwest along with the parent trough, and an MCV is expected to move through Iowa to northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin earlier in the period. So the outflow boundary of this, which is typically how things end up happening, is where the storms will end up developing. So in a sense, you're almost getting a tutorial about an MCV. So eastern Iowa, southern Wisconsin, north central Illinois. Most complex portion of the forecast will be the evolution of the MCV. That's the question that we have with today's setup. So the character of convection associated with the feature is still loosely organized, but these things can ramp up quickly. And like I said, they're very hard to pick up on models. Almost impossible. Really, the best way to look at it is on satellite, which is what we'll do here. So by this point, it's kind of hard to pick up on things right now because I don't think the MCV is still fully developed yet. What we'll be looking for is, like I said, the clockwise flow versus the counterclockwise flow. You're still seeing plenty of that right now. But down the line is when I think we'll start to see it begin to take shape here. So we're waiting to see what happens, but nonetheless, it would be pretty easy to see it on visible satellite, but when we look at visible, it's pretty dark right now still. The sun's not up over this region, so not going to really be able to see a whole lot here, sadly. So yeah, but I'm anticipating something probably developing right around here. That's kind of a moot point. But yeah, right across where I have that circle and that clockwise motion, that's where I would expect it to form. But anyways, I'm going to go back and start looking at the rest of the days for the weekend. So this is another interesting day. This is the setup for tomorrow, Saturday. Northeast is now in play, and then also we have the southwestern plains here towards the panhandles, Oklahoma and Texas. And then, of course, Kansas, Colorado, and parts of New Mexico are even in play for severe weather. Main threat with those areas are mainly going to be wind and hail, but there is a 2% threat of tornado over towards the northeast. This is a little bit closer to a traditional setup. When we look at the upper wind patterns, you'll kind of see the difference between the two a little bit, especially as you go lower into the lower levels of the atmosphere, I should say. But we go to day 3, and this day is probably one that has piqued my interest out of all 3 so far. This seems like a little bit closer to a classical setup or classic summertime setup. I mainly think damaging winds will be the leading threat, but I do see the potential for all 3 hazards being in play here. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. So basically, this is including St. Louis, Kansas City, Jefferson City, pretty much almost all of Missouri at this point. And then, of course, looking over towards eastern Kansas and southeastern Nebraska, once again, we could be seeing an additional threat for severe weather. So just make sure we're staying weather aware across these regions throughout the weekend, because I do think the flood threat will go up because there's been a lot of storms going through this region as well. So we'll start out by taking a look at the different heights of the atmosphere. We're going to actually start out with 200. I was thinking doing 500, but 200 is a key component in all of this. With today's setup, it's going to be relevant, but not quite as relevant with it being an MCV, because actually the less wind shear, usually the better. There is a little bit of wind shear present at multiple levels of the atmosphere with this setup here, so it's a little bit questionable as to how things will unfold. But as we continue to go on here, we'll start to see the setup for Saturday begin to take shape here. And you can see the convergence, divergence kind of taking shape around 21Z to 00Z here. It does look mildly impressive across this region. So anywhere around Boston, around the Cape, could see marginal severe weather, maybe even a little bit more significant. Not going to read too much in this because I am kind of short on time. I'm having a delayed start at work due to the thunderstorms in the area, and actually if you listen closely you probably can hear a couple of rumbles here and there. But this is what we're looking like heading into Saturday night, Sunday. Then as far as 200 is concerned, our setup isn't the most robust, but you do start to see a little bit of a deterioration happening here, and maybe even towards more so northern parts of this area, towards northeastern, I would say, can't get the word out, northeastern Kansas and Missouri, and northwestern Missouri here might be a target area of interest, maybe towards central Missouri. So they may raise that threat a little further to the north, but we'll see what happens with that. But this is how the threat will look heading into Sunday and then into Monday. Go ahead and go take a look at 500 here. And this is where you start to see the trough coming into play here. It's the mid to upper level trough, as I like to call them. 500's pretty high up into the atmosphere at this point. So our trough comes into play. This is how we end up getting our severe setup here. And you can actually even see, just based off of how that slight risk was shaped, the storm motion as well, as we could be seeing northwest to southeast kind of motion here. So that comes into play. And then, of course, with tomorrow, we do have that convergence divergence setup here again. And then as we head into Sunday, this one things get a little bit more pronounced. Like I said, I'm seeing an increase in favoritism, more so towards, like I said, the northern parts of Missouri now versus what they had on the SBC outlook. So I think some updates could be coming there. We'll have to just see how that plays out, though. We go to 700 millibars. This is where things get really interesting. And this is probably where we'll start to see that wind shear try to lighten up here. If it does, then that MCV will probably mature a lot better. But from the looks of it here, it does. There is a shortwave trough that tries to develop here. It's nothing super duper robust, but you don't really always have to have that to get severe weather. And this is a very good example of that. So anyone across the plains here needs to be on the lookout, of course. Around 700 as far as the setup over towards the northeast is concerned on Saturday. It's nothing incredible. It's not a really strong shortwave. It really kind of leans a little further back, if anything. Maybe towards the Great Lakes, I would say the threat for severe weather and tornadoes might be more favorable. But we'll see how that plays out. But as we go towards Sunday, there's that new shortwave trough that pops up here. And I think this is where, and like I said, I think we're probably going to see this threat kind of scoot more to the north here, especially earlier into the evening. But it's still questionable at this point. This is a decent sounding, nothing incredible here. Like I said, this is GFS. We're not really honing in with any of the short range models because we're still a little too far out. Probably by this afternoon, I'd be able to take a better look at it. So that's what we're looking at for 700. Going to go ahead and take a look at 850, but I'm not going to read into it too much. Usually looking at convective models, I tend to do better on the days closest to the event. And we're just kind of in that really odd range. And then here's what I'm talking about right here. Look at that. Look at how little wind shear there is despite there being that 2% tornado threat. That's because of that MCV. MCV kind of brings its own little bag of wild card tricks into the pot here, so to speak. So just because you don't see tornado or quote unquote tornado juice doesn't mean you can't see anything at all. You always have to read the synopsis. Sometimes I have to even remember myself. That being said, here going into 21Z, I do see some wind shear, but like I said, I'm seeing it more so towards the Great Lakes over here towards western New York more so than over towards the Cape Cod and New England areas. But not to say that it's zero, though. We do see some pockets where we're getting up to about 20 to 30. So if a discrete storm ends up over the right area, who knows what can happen. But going into Sunday, this is where things really start to get interesting here. Like I said, I'm seeing an increase in low-level jet more so over towards this area, but of course this is only one model that I'm looking at right now. It'll be interesting to see what the convective models do with this. If they're on board with this, I'm definitely thinking we'll see a trend to the north here. As far as temperatures are concerned for everybody, it's going to be, of course, pretty hot. I mean, summertime. Also, been noting an increase in excessive heat and maybe a hazardous heat over here towards the northwest. So definitely would like to make sure that you guys are staying weather aware over there. As far as Sunday is concerned, triple-digit temperatures are starting to come back into play across the southern plains here, which is a big concern of mine for you guys. So make sure that we're staying inside. We're not having to be outside for extended periods of time, and even if so, make sure you're taking breaks often. But that's pretty much what we're looking like for the weekend here as far as temperatures. Dew points are also going to be a big factor, especially when these areas of high heat. It's a big concern to me. But as we continue to draw forward here, of course, with the severe weather threat, that's also another point of interest. We get ample moisture anywhere past the Ozarks in particular, so no real surprises there. Like I said, nothing's really cut off the Gulf of Mexico moisture this year, so there's been no shortage of Gulf of Mexico moisture, which is really rich in content, so no surprises there. So we could even go into next week here and we can see that nothing's really stopping the Gulf of Mexico moisture train, so to speak. So last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at today and tomorrow's Cape value setups. I can only look so far, and that's why I really haven't used this model much today. But as far as things are concerned right now, there still seems like there's a fair abundance of Cape across parts of Indiana. Actually, it's a pretty high, very rich Cape, actually, if I were to say so myself, across these regions. Of course, the NAM tends to be a little bit of a hotter model, but if things go the right way, we could see something a little bit more along the lines of this, which is very concerning. So, fortunately, it looks like with this one I won't be able to go live, but if this setup comes into play, man, we could have some serious issues here. There's not much in the way of a cap that's going to end up stopping this. It's very good lift. That's one thing that MCV does a very good job of. And then storm relative felicities are pretty impressive at this point. Also, shear is high. Just all the values that you would want for severe weather are they're there. Not super abundant, but they're definitely there. Still think damaging wind is the main threat here. This does have a little bit of an indicator of a potential downdraft photograph, but we'll see what happens. That being said here, this is at 22Z, so probably if I'm working still at this point, we'll see what happens with that. As we go into Saturday here, we do get some ample cape over the northeast here. And it lasts for a while too, interestingly enough, so definitely need to be on the lookout for that. And taking a sneak peek into Sunday, because this is as far as I can go, you can actually see some cape starting to build over here towards Missouri here in Kansas. Of course, this is by 18Z, so cape probably would peak out around 20Z or something like that around Sunday. Of course, like I said, can't really read into it too much since I'm not fully in range yet, but probably will be by tomorrow evening. And then I'll talk more about the threat tomorrow morning, since like I said, I don't really have I'm gonna probably be tied up tonight and won't be able to make a video. So last but not least, we'll go ahead and take a look at the precipitation type. This is what the radar could look like. This is also showing where our low pressures are. Unfortunately, this doesn't show fronts, but in my head I can kind of pick them out. But this is today's setup. It's not really, like I said, model doesn't really do a great job of picking up on that MCV, but the threat is definitely there. And then as we head into Saturday, here's our storms for the northeast. Here's our storms for the panhandles. Outside of that, maybe a few pop-up showers and storms here and there across isolated regions here. But other than that, nothing really crazy going on until we get into Sunday. Sunday, and even and like I said, GFS has been kind of teasing maybe a little bit more of a northern Missouri type setup versus central Missouri more so. It definitely looks like that ends up coming into fruition, and maybe into the overnight is whenever we start to see more weather towards St. Louis, as that low starts to come from northwest to southeast here, which also could potentially increase the flood threat. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But then after that, we'll probably start out the week pretty active as well. But that's all I got for you guys on this video here. Again, if you enjoyed it, know it was a little lengthy, make sure you smash that like button, decimating that subscribe button, hit that share button as well. But this has been Tire Metal at Weatherman. Thank you again for 500 subs. Here's to the next 500 and more than that even. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, take care and have an awesome day.